speaking about Cain, that the Torah says, "Vayhi boneh ir," he was building a city, to say that, after this conflict between him and Hevel over possession, he wants and over stability, right? Cain is the permanent dweller. He lives in one place. He has he tills the land. He has fields, and Hevel is a nomad. Cain is about to build a city, but he never accomplishes it. So it's his mission is never accomplished, even though he's trying to do that. Um, but there are several questions, other questions that arise from this issue of Cain building a city, and that is, I think the main question is, who is he building a city for, right? Vayhi boneh ir. So we know that Adam and his wife, Adam and Hava, are there. Now, Cain and Hevel also lived there, wherever it was, probably somewhere in the Middle East, in the Fertile Crescent, or if we follow archaeological evidence, sorry, paleontological evidence, it's somewhere in North Africa, first humans, right? So whatever, we'll talk about these versions, right? Or is it in Africa, or is it in the Fertile Crescent, right? So there's Adam and Hava, Cain and his wife, and he's building a city. He has a son called Hanoch. So by any stretch of the imagination, I think a dwelling place for 5 people cannot be called a city, right? And even you say, okay, no, he built it for his grandchildren, great grandchildren. How long did they have to live to build that city? We don't know. Cain, wait, is Cain mentioned in the? I need to check. Is it mentioned how long did Cain live? No, the genealogy of Cain is not mentioned with the. Wait, maybe I'm mistaken. With the years, let's see. Yeah, Cain is not mentioned in the genealogy. The genealogy is the one that comes from the side of Shet or Seth, right? So even if we say that Cain lived, a couple hundred years, so we'll say that building a city is building a city. Every 20 years he has to add another house, right? After 800 years, the family is already 100 people. So, like Susie, right? This must have been other people. Cain has a wife, right? So, that's the second. So first, Cain is building a city. Cain has a wife, and also Cain tells God, when God drives him away, he says, "Is my sin that great? Now that you've driven me away, everyone who finds me will kill me." Who's that everyone? Who are those people who are going to kill Cain? Right? So the Midrash had a problem with that and answered that Cain speaks about the animals, that the animals will kill him. An interesting concept in the Midrash, saying that animals are naturally afraid of humans, but a human who committed murder, at least at these times, would lose his image of God, and the animals wouldn't be afraid of him anymore. And that's why God Cain get this mark, the mark of Cain. That's it's a little hard to accept that the way Cain speaks. We understand that he speaks about humans, and also what I think highlights the that this is the clear interpretation is that after the flood, the first commandment that God gives Noah and his family, or one of the first things that they're being told, is "Shofech dam adam ba'adam damo yishafech." You cannot spare a murderer. It's as if God regrets sparing Cain. It led to negative consequences. So, so we have that question still looming, right? Who is he afraid of? How did the rabbis deal with the question of Cain's wife? They gave him a sister. You know that, right? So And even according to one of the midrashim, Adam and Hava had 2 sons and two daughters, and Cain married his sister, and Hevel married his sister. And according to one midrash, Cain had 2 sisters, like they were triplets, and Hevel had 1 sister. I mean, we're creating new scenarios in order to try to explain what happened there, and it's not written. But remember that we discussed in previous classes the notion that what we're reading in Bereshit is not a factual description of creation and of what happened. It doesn't work on many levels. There's a right, Shana. That also, women are invisible. I mean, that's something that we have to have in mind. Women appear in the Tanakh when they play an important role. Otherwise, they would be mentioned only as a footnote, and which is a problem. But still, their status in Tanakh is much more advanced than what it was in parallel contemporary societies. So now we have this. If we look at this story as symbolic, what the Torah is trying to tell us, not scientifically how the world was created. Like Rabbi Daniel Weishaupt said yesterday, right? When after he came back from the Grand Canyon and he told the other rabbi, I had 3 billion years old dust on my boots. The rabbi answered, the word is 7,000 years old, right? So, okay, some people decide to believe that, and other people decide to follow in the way of Maimonides, who says, Kabela emet, you have to accept the truth. The scientific evidence is irrefutable. We have to accept that. And it's very easy to accept that because it means that the Torah was not written as a scientific textbook. It delivers a message. So the message is the world was created in a certain way by God. Fine. This is how you live in the world. The story of the Garden of Eden, the fruit. We went through all this. It's a guide to life. This is how you live in the world. Cain and Hevel also, their story is also a guide to life. Sibling rivalry, etc. Yes, so he commented 5781 is an artificial construct. Yes, the rabbi decided at a certain point, let us create a calendar that would be easier for people to follow. So they went back in time and they tried to reconstruct time since the creation, which, by the way, they made a mistake. They lost about 156 years in the Persian period. We should really count now something like 5966 or something like that. But it doesn't matter because it's just a matter of consensus. We all agree that this is the year that we count. It's okay. So what is really the story there? Were there other people at the time of Cain and Hevel or not? So I always thought that there were. I mean, I'm not always, probably, at a certain age with understanding science and all that. That's how I felt. And a couple of years ago, many years ago, probably, I stumbled upon a lecture of a rabbi on Aish.com, Aish Torah. And that lecture was titled, "Will the real Homo sapiens please stand up?" And I love that lecture. I was very impressed that Aish included it on its website. Years later, I wanted to pull out this lecture, and I went looking for it. It wasn't there anymore. Aish became too started tilting to the right. It was too progressive for them, so they cleaned it. By the way, I think in some they even removed pictures of women speakers, teachers from the website. That was also a major change. But I still found it on a website called Failed Messiah of a Lubavitch Hasid that went off the derech sort of and listed it there. I don't know how you could find it now because I think someone, an Orthodox Jew, paid the author of Failed Messiah a hefty sum to shut down his website. But I'm sure you could find it somewhere. But I'll tell you what it says. It's because it's very simple. I mean, you don't hide the truth by shutting down websites. What he argued, which I think is very reasonable, is that I mean, that if, as believing Jews, as observer Jews, we choose to accept the validity of the Torah. Some people could say we don't believe it. It's fine, it's their prerogative. Nobody could force you to believe. But as a believer, if you believe that the text of the Torah is valid, then you have to ask what is the message in the story of creation and how we reconcile it with reality. So science has proven today that we all come from one human ancestor. That her name is Lucy, right? Am I right? That's the name. I almost said Hava. They used to call her Eve, but now I think the name is Lucy. She was found in Africa. I think the recent findings were dated at about 150,000 years. That I think the most ancient remains that were certified. And we know that there were humanoids prior to that for millions of years. What is still unclear, it's not exactly the missing link, but how was the change made, the transition from a species without the ability to communicate with language. Language is the key factor. The ability to communicate with language and to create literature or messages that will be transmitted from one generation to another generation. How did this happen? So the language gene has been located, has been identified. We know there is a gene that is responsible for the ability to understand grammar and syntax. Yes, but even that is considered an evolutionary leap in science. So what that rabbi suggested is that though the Torah tells us, when the Torah speaks about the creation of Adam and Hava in the Garden of Eden, is of that moment of transition, of God intervening, for whatever reason, whatever way he chose to do it, installs the new software, humanity 2.0, if you will, right, in the species that already existed. And it's interesting that the translation, based on the Midrash, says that Vayipach be'apav ruach hayim vayi adam lenefesh haya. When God creates Adam, it says that he blew life into his nostrils and he became a living soul, nefesh haya. The Targum, the Aramaic translation, reads that ruach memalela, a speaking spirit. So the Midrash identifies the creation of man with the creation of language. So, in other words, the Torah doesn't give us the exact details of the creation of mankind, but tells us that the transition into the mankind, into civilization that we know today, was done through language. And now it's understandable. There weren't only two humans, there were already hundreds or thousands of people. Adam and Hava are archetypes, and the same is Cain and Abel. So that's the approach. Yoel, you have a comment? Say no. No, okay. Anyone, any question, comments on that? Might be yes.
Just put it in the chat. I was wondering how he could build a city if he's supposed to be Nav and Nad Baratz.
Right. So that's why the Midrash tries to answer this question by saying he was building a city. Like he really never settled down. He started building and he had to move. But maybe even the idea of building a city is in itself lack of stability, because he's not a farmer anymore. He doesn't have the fields to which he connects and can live there. But the cities moved from place to place more than farmers did. Because once the city ran its supplies, it would move. Maybe, I don't know. I don't have a clear answer to that. Okay, so that was a general comment on Bereshit that we could have done in the beginning, but that's at that moment that Cain is exiled, all these things come together. So it was a good place to point it out. So before we go to the text itself, I can mention several things in passing, and then we'll go to the story of Lemekh and his wives. We have another, right after this comes the genealogy of Bereshit, with people living close to 1,000 years. That was a problem that is a problem that bothers a lot of people. How do we understand the ages of Bereshit? So 1,000 years. Is it possible? Now we know that unless their DNA and their composition is completely different, it's impossible for people to live for that long, because after a certain age, the the not after a certain from the very beginning, the new cells that are created uh, are weaker than the previous cells. So there's a limit, right? So to what age, uh, to up to what age one could live, and for the cells to keep reproducing and maintain the body healthy, right? Eduardo is equipped to answer that. Am I right? Or yeah, okay. So 1,000 years is impossible. Even 100 and it's not a coincidence that when we talk about the oldest people in the world, the age hovers at around 120, which the Torah eventually says, "Vayu yamav 120 shana." This is the limit that I give humans. There's a certain deterioration that happens in the body that the body cannot recover. So why do we have those ages? 1,000, not 1,000. Adam lived 930 years. Metushela, the oldest, who has the record of the oldest person ever, lived 969 years. And then all hover, the first 10 generations around the 900s, and then they go down. So some people wanted to say that it's not exactly 900, or, divided by 10. So that would work perfectly for the first batch, because they were from 900 to 700 years. So they would in the range of 90 to 70 years. But what do you do with Abraham? Abraham lived 175 years. It can be 175, but it can be 17 and a half either. So what do we do? What kind of let's divide it by 3. So Abraham lived 60 something years, but that would still give those who lived 900 years 300 years. So what do you do there? So to me, the most plausible solution is that of Professor Umberto Casuto, who was one of the first who dealt, and I mentioned it before, who dealt with the discrepancies between sections of the Torah that led to the documentary hypotheses, and also how to reconcile Torah with science and Torah with the ancient mythologies. And what I mentioned before from his writings is the idea that the Torah is having a dialogue or a polemic with other mythologies that coexisted at that time in the ancient Near East and in Egypt. So, for example, in the creation of the world, we see the Tehom, the abyss, which is parallel to Tiamat in the Babylonian mythology. The Torah wants to say God is in control. And similarly, the long life that the Torah allots to all these people is an attack or a refutation of the ancient mythologies, which gave their heroes or their gods and heroes and kings exaggerated lifespans. In Egypt, I think it was in something like 26,000 years. In Babylonia as well, also in the thousands of years. So the Torah wants to challenge that. But there's a problem. People knew those stories. It was part of their narrative. It was part of, like, the kings were demigods or children of gods. So, and then I also, again, I'm going back to the point that I made in the very beginning, that when the Torah makes the statement in chapter 1, verses 26, 27, that man was created in the image of God, it pulls the rug from under the feet of any monarch, of any ruler who wants to say that he is divine. The lowliest person that you could consider and the mightiest one are all created in the image of God. We're all equal. No one is the one divine. No one comes. No one is a descendant of the gods, or we are all. Either we're all or none of us. So instead of the Torah coming and telling people, listen, your ancient heroes, your greatest leaders lived just like you 70, 80 years, the Torah goes through a gradual process. The first humans lived almost 1,000 years, but almost no one passes that threshold of 1,000 years. This is like the mythical number. We will see later in Tanakh 110. A lot of numbers on the decimal scale are symbolic numbers, also sevens, but a 10 is a complete number. 100, 1,000. It is mentioned in Tehillim, Ki elef shanim be'anecha, keyom etamol ki avor. 1,000 years for you, God, is like one day. So it's appropriate that you have one day. The day of God is 1,000 years. No one lives to be 1,000. Adam inches very close to it, 930. Metushelah 969. And then the Torah drops from Adam on. The line keeps dropping, 930, 910, 875. There's a peak with Metushelah, I think, to make it realistic, because if it keeps dropping, it looks too suspicious. It's too organized, right? But it keeps going. Like let's go through the list and I'll show you how it works. So verse 5, Adam lived 930 years, Shet 912 years, Enosh 905, Kenan 910, Mahalalel 895, Yered 962, Hanoch, he dies at the young age of 365. Again, symbolic number corresponding to the days of the solar year. Metushelah 969, and then we get Lemekh 777, and we get to Noah. So the ages keep dropping. Then when we get to the next list, which is after the flood, in chapter 9, no, sorry, chapter 10, we will see that here Shem, the son of Noah, lived 600 years. Here they don't give us the full number. They say how long they lived until they have a child, and then you have to calculate. So Shelah lived, if you put it together, 434. Ever lives 464. 239, 239, etc. It keeps dropping until it gets to the Avot. So the Torah gradually brings it to the point where here's a normal human being. We have later in Tanakh only one exception, only one person who, not one person, family, Aaron and Moshe, who die. Aaron at 123 and Moshe at 120, but that's it. Very few people, and some of their family 137, around that age. So that's the way for the Torah to deal with mythology. So that's something that I wanted to bring up. It's a general comment on the structure of Bereshit. And now we get to Lemekh, and here's that's my commentary, and I think more to the point of the storylines of Bereshit and how it presents to us human civilization. So Lemekh is one of the descendants of Shet, and Lemekh is known as the father of 4 children. He has Lemekh is a descendant of Cain. He's the 7th generation of Cain. And we read here on verse 19 of chapter 4, Vayikach lo Lemekh shetei nashim, shema achat Ada, v'shema sheni Tzila. Lemekh took 2 wives, one was Ada and one was Tzila. Vateled Ada et Yaval, hu haya avi yoshev oel u'mikneh. Ada bore Yaval, he was the father of such as dwell in tents and have cattle. V'shem ahiv Yuval, hu haya avi kol tofes kinor ve'ugav, and his brother's name was Jubal, Yuval. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and pipe. V'tzila gam hi yalda et Tuval Kain, lotesh kol choresh nechoshet u'varzel. Tzila also bore Tuval Kain, the forger of every cutting instruments of brass and iron. Va'achot Tubalkain Na'ama, and the sister of Tubalkain was Na'ama. So he has 4 children, 3 sons. All their names rhyme somehow. Yaval, Yuval, Tuval. Very creative. The root of Yaval is to lead. Yuval also means a small river, a brook, or a rivulet. And it's a very common name today. Used to be only a boy's name. Now it's also a girl's name, Yuval, in the last 20 years. So Yaval is to lead. That's why a brook is called Yuval, because it leads, it paves the way. So they are all leaders. What is the importance of their professions? One is a shepherd, Yoshev Oilo Mikne. One is a musician. One is a blacksmith. And then we have the sister Naama, that we don't know anything. We don't know anything about her profession and what she did. So again, we have a shepherd, a musician, a blacksmith, and Naama. So I think that what the Torah wants to tell us here, just like the story of Cain and Hevel, the conflict between the shepherds and the farmers. This is a description of the roots or the beginning of civilization, of elements that you have to have in every society. And those are the children of Lemekh. So, and I think that when we think about the shepherd and the blacksmith, we could easily understand their role. Right? The shepherd represents agriculture. He's the leader of all those who eventually had the profession of anything that had to do with agriculture, whether as farmers or shepherds. The blacksmith represents technology. Any creative work that involves metalworking, technology, is represented by Tuval Kain. There were actually those who wanted to say that Tuval Kain sounds like Vulcan, who was not that of Dr. Spock from Star Trek, but Vulcan, the blacksmith, who is in Roman mythology is parallel to Hephaestus in the Greek mythology. But it's too late to have the Roman story comes so much later that it's hard to find that connection. But what is interesting here, what is the role of the musician, right? It's important to have, you have the blacksmith, you have the shepherd, right? Technology, agriculture. What is music doing there? What is Naama? So I know there are a lot of musicians here. What do you think is the role of the musician? So Aram says art is the sign of civilization. Yes, art is important.
Culture.
Culture, yes. It's so we could see music as culture, as art.
Spiritual life.
What? Spiritual life,
life.
culture, right? In the Tanakh, music represents spirituality. When Elisha wasn't able to prophesy, he asked holy men again, bring a musician. And then it says, as the musician started to play, he was imbued with the Spirit of God and he was able to prophesy. So that's another aspect of music. And
Bards.
Okay, so what was the role of the bards? This is an interesting story. It is your question. In the book about Noah's flood, called Noah's Flood by William Ryan, in the introduction, there's a long discussion of the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, and the question is whether those were memorized word by word, how are they transmitted from generation to generation? And they talk about the bards and the troubadours, the traveling musicians, all that. And they say that there is a general structure of rhyme and meter and number of words, etc. But those bards had sort of like a creative freedom to tell the story, not necessarily exactly by the same words every night. Of course, many of them memorized a lot of these verses, but the through that research that they did, we learn that the bards, the troubadours, Homer, musicians in general, were in charge of transmitting tradition from one generation to another. This is the way that you pass on knowledge with music. At night around the bonfire, you sit and sing songs. But not only that, think of in so many books and movies, people recover their memories from childhood with a certain tune. Someone who lost his memory also walks into a place and he hear, oh, this is my mother used to sing that for me, and right. And in terms of memorizing, this is like maybe I did it with some of you in another class that I had, but it's a cute experiment that I came up with. When people say, why do you think that we need music to remember? And I would challenge them this. So, okay, think about a book that you love, a book that you really, really love, and think of how many paragraphs you could quote verbatim from that book. Do it now. Think about that. Now think about songs that you love, and think of the lyrics to how many songs can you recite from memory. This is a simple experience. Doesn't matter how much, in one of my classes, actually at Berman, I asked this question. One of the girls quoted the whole first chapter of Harry Potter, but that was the exception. And I'm sure that she remembers many more songs. And always when you compare how much you would remember with music, without music, you remember more with music. So the Yuval is actually extremely important. We have here technology, agriculture, and tradition. Masoret, knowledge, is all transmitted through music. Years later, after I started doing that experiment with people, based on my reading of the pasuk, only a couple of years ago, I heard, I think in the podcast or whatever, the explanation of why that happens. Why do we remember better with music? And I knew it also, by the way, from my wife's work, because she's a music teacher and a Hebrew teacher, and she would put music to words, and the kids would learn much better like that. So the explanation to that is that music and language, each is processed in a different part of our brain. So when we hear music with language, our mind kicks into action and new neural connections are created. We're basically working. When we hear music for the first time with words, our brain is working and creating like new neural connections, and they remain in place. And then it's an effort that, because of that effort, we're invested in and we remember it better, which is fascinating to me. That, like I said, Bereshit is the book of communication. So many instances throughout that story, you find that. So then who's left is Naama. We don't know what she did, but I think that maybe we could say, that's what I think, that Naama comes from the word ni'imut, pleasantness. And it tells us that, you work hard as a shepherd, as a blacksmith. You might pray and recite your traditions, but you also need to have time for yourself, for leisure, for pleasantness, for things that soothe you. So that's the good side of Lemekh. He didn't bring them up. He didn't bring up those children. They were the children of his wives. Lemekh per se was a violent person. He's the one who comes and says right after that the list of those 4 children. He said, "I have killed a man for offending me and a child for wounding me." And I think that this is another step in the deterioration of mankind, from Adam, who eats from the forbidden fruit, sort of an arbitrary transgression, to Cain, who commits a crime of passion, to Lemekh, who says, I am going to kill anyone who bothers me. And maybe that's also, if I end up with one more symbolic comment, his name is Lemekh, which is the same letters of Melech, of king, leader, but reversed.